Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, decisions, and situations in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact our freedoms.
Please become a monthly supporter of the State of Freedom at freedomstate.us as we continue to expand the voice of liberty across Louisiana and beyond.
Merry Christmas, everybody. We are here this morning, this afternoon, wrapping up the last episode of the year. We'll be reflecting on 2024 and looking ahead to what 2025 has in store. But first, let's focus on the reason we're celebrating this time of year, the birth of our Lord and Savior, King Jesus. The scripture today is one that should probably be familiar to most of you. It is Luke chapter 1, verses 39 through 55. And this, we're picking up a story where Mary had just learned that she's going to be giving birth to the Messiah, Jesus. And she went away to stay with her elderly Aunt Elizabeth and her uncle Zachariah, and finds that Elizabeth is pregnant as well. All right. Afterward, Mary arose and hurried off to the hill country of Judea, to the village where Zachariah and Elizabeth lived. Arriving at their home, Mary entered the house and greeted Elizabeth. At the moment she heard Mary's voice, the baby within Elizabeth's womb jumped and kicked. And suddenly Elizabeth was filled to overflowing with the Holy Spirit. With a loud voice, she prophesied with power. Mary, you are a woman given the highest favor and privilege above all others, for your child is destined to bring God great delight. How did I deserve such a remarkable honor to have the mother of my Lord come and visit me? The moment you came in the door and greeted me, my baby danced inside me with ecstatic joy. Great favor is upon you, for you have believed every word spoken to you from the Lord. And Mary sang this song. My soul is ecstatic, overflowing with praises to God. My spirit bursts with joy over my life-giving God, for he has set his tender gaze upon me, his lowly servant girl, and from here on everyone will know that I have been favored and blessed. The Mighty One has worked a mighty miracle for me. Holy is his name. Mercy kisses all his godly lovers from one generation to the next. Mighty power flows from him to scatter all those who walk in pride. Proudful princes he tears from their thrones, and he lifts up the lowly to take their place. Those who hunger for him will always be filled, but the smug and self-satisfied he will send away empty, because he can never forget to show mercy. He has helped his chosen servant Israel, keeping his promises to Abraham and to his descendants forever. And before going home, Mary stayed with Elizabeth for about 3 months. And what hit me this morning when I was reading this is that Elizabeth and Mary understood the season that they were in. They were both women who loved God and made themselves available to him to be part of the miracle of salvation that he was bringing to earth. And in this passage, they're both filled with wonder and expectation for what the Lord would do through the ones he was birthing through them, John the Baptist and Jesus. Elizabeth gave birth to John the Baptist, as we know, the one who prepared the way of the Lord Jesus, who Mary birthed. And it's also interesting to me that the Lord drew these two women who were both living with a sense of incredible expectation and found themselves in improbable circumstances. He drew them together, an elderly pregnant woman and a pregnant virgin, to be together in this delicate time. And I think that should serve as an instruction to us as well. It's important for us to surround ourselves with the right people for the season we're in, especially as we're in a time of dreaming and anticipation for what the Lord is doing. Mary went to a place where she would be encouraged and cared for, to a place where people were like-minded in their expectation for what the Lord was doing. And that's so important for the season we're in as well. So don't spend your expectation time with dream killers. We need to spend them with people who lift us up and who are dreaming in the same direction as us.
Yeah.
And I hope the reading of this encourages you to take a fresh look of the scriptures at the scriptures this season, to take a fresh look at the Christmas story and the prophecies that foretold it, because our God is a God who still works miracles. He still astounds the wise and gives understanding to the humble, and he still draws near to those who draw near to him. The Christmas season is one where we are accustomed to turning our heart toward a sense of expectation. And this year, I think more than most in recent history, really, we need to be positioned not only in expectation, but in personal readiness, surrounded by like minded people for what the Lord wants to do in us and through us.
Yeah. It struck me, Danielle. Can you imagine if Mary had gone somewhere else? Mary probably had other friends. She probably had other people who knew her. Can you imagine if she went to somebody else who was not of like mind? Someone else who would have doubted her decision, would have
Exactly.
called into question the providence of God, would have torn her down. She could have made a very different decision, but she chose to go to someone who was like minded and who would affirm her and allow her to overcome what I promise you was some natural anxiety and anticipation. Can you imagine it being in Mary's situation? Just thinking about that, the Holy Spirit is responsible for the conception not only of a child, but of the Son of God and the Messiah coming into the world. It's like to say that that is a lot to wrap your arms around for a 15, 16-year-old girl is an understatement. And your point about Mary going to someone who was of like mind, Elizabeth, and probably, even though it's not said in the scripture, I'm sure surrounded herself with others who supported her on her journey toward the delivery of the Messiah. And she was able to wait with that sense of expectation. She was able to deal with her anxiety and probably some of her doubts along the way, precisely because of that. So, your point about who we choose to be around, who we choose to associate with, they're either going to be people who feed the Spirit of Christ within us or people who quench it out and try to suffocate it. And that is such a critical decision in that association, in that choice.
Well said, Chris. Well, it has been a big year for us at the podcast, and it's been a big year in our state and our country. In terms of the podcast, some updates for us. We finally moved to video, as many of you may know, and we started live streaming a few weeks ago. In fact, this is live streamed right now on Rumble, X, and YouTube. On Rumble, if you're having a hard time finding us, it is because our handle is TSOF Podcast, and on X, we are Freedom State US. So we hope you will look for us there. Put on the notifications so you know when we're going live. We tend to do it lately at about 10 a.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays, but we don't always hit that mark. So today we're at a little bit later time, coming in right before the holidays. And Chris, we have had some really incredible guests this year. We have talked to some just really amazing people on topics that span the gamut. Who were some of your favorites?
I have to tell you, Danielle, and this is not even one that I discussed. This is one that we discussed. This is one that just came to my mind as you were talking. Boone Cutler was such an extraordinary guest, moved me so much. A decorated military hero, injured in battle, spent time recovering at Walter Reed Memorial. And it was that experience in combat that gave Boone the inspiration to start a big organizations and to provide such great help for veterans who have suffered so much in combat and who truly, truly need healing and hope for their lives. I mean, we forget that war is an ugly, ugly thing, Danielle.
Yeah.
It was Douglas MacArthur who said, only the dead see the end of war, and only the soldier truly understands the horrors of war.
Wow.
And we benefit from the scars and the sacrifice and the wounds of those warriors. And for Boone Cutler to spend his life dedicating himself to providing relief and support and services to all of our military veterans who have really paid not the ultimate sacrifice because they're still alive, but very close to the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom, so that you and I have the freedom to sit here in a free country and exercise a core constitutional right. It's because of the soldier. And I'm so thankful for Boone Cutler. And again, having him on our show moved me very, very deeply. I was obviously also very pleased to have General Flynn on, who is such a hero and patriot.
Yeah.
David Clements, who has done probably more than anyone in the country for issues related to election integrity and has really suffered the slings and arrows and the scars to prove it. So those are just two or three of the guests that I really, really was inspired by and just so privileged to have on.
Yeah, some of my favorite guests are the ones that we get to have spiritual conversations with. I think about uh, you mentioned David Clements. Our first interview with him was just incredible. We totally threw away the script, and Holy Spirit came in, and we just talked about things that were not even on the list, right? And then you think about people like Tina Peters. We had the opportunity to have her on the show 3 or 4 times. What an absolute patriot, and a woman who's suffering in a jail cell right now at the hands of criminal government officials that were probably not rightfully elected. But I don't know if you saw, Chris, this weekend. Matt Meck sent us a text of Steve Bannon saying that he was going to be speaking with President Trump and recommending that President Trump withhold all federal funding for the state of Colorado until those criminals in charge release Tina from jail. So not
Wow.
one university, not one not one institution, no healthcare money, nothing. No money is what Steve Bannon said needs to happen for the entire state of Colorado until Tina Peters is
Yeah.
freed from jail. So pray with us for that. Be prayerful for Tina and those wrongfully jailed at this in this season, especially as we're looking at these horrible clemency and pardons coming out of the Biden administration. But we also, Chris, had the incredible um, honor to interview Chris and Cynthia Price, some J6ers, as well as their attorney, and Ed Tarpley as well, who's a Louisiana-based attorney who represented Stuart Rhodes, the founder of the Oath Keepers. Some of these people, it's just such an honor to be able to give their story some airtime.
It is, and Danielle, it was emotional for me at times during the Price interview. The husband and wife. When you go back and think, I mean, I never thought that people like that did anything wrong whatsoever. I've always thought that this was a government conspiracy and it was designed to intimidate future people who may be inclined to exercise their constitutional rights against doing so. This is what happens in the United States of America when you exercise a core constitutional freedom. And the Prices were casualties of that. And they came on and did really just reaffirmed to us the fact that they did absolutely nothing wrong and yet were made to pay a very, very harsh consequence, not for reasons of justice, but for reasons purely of perverse partisan politics. And I am very hopeful that we've seen the end of that chapter in our history with Trump's election and some of these cabinet nominations. I certainly hope so.
I hope so too, and I hope that justice is coming for people like Liz Cheney and so many others, crying Adam Kinzinger, everyone that was complicit and really masterminded the setup of these people, Nancy Pelosi. I'm ready to see their faces behind bars. I
Me
really
too.
am. I
And
really am.
Danielle, I am too. And remember, I asked very directly when Mark Lucas was on our show, will there be some real accountability in the new administration with Patel, with the new, with the Attorney General? And he is firmly convinced that there will be real redress and real accountability, and there has to be.
There has
Not
to
big,
be.
and it's not, and it's important to remember, Danielle, it's not political retaliation. This is appropriate retribution for criminal acts that took place that caused devastating consequences to people across the board. And there has to be real retributive justice associated with that so that the American people can be reassured that we do live in a country where the rule of law matters. That's why this is so important.
Yeah. And, you're talking about justice and can't help but think about Craig Sawyer, the founder of Veterans for Child Rescue, and J.J. Carroll, who came on, the former Border Patrol agent. Those two guys are doing so much to raise awareness and to really help children and women and men in really horrifying situations. And I think I probably got more comments. I got more text messages and calls about that J.J. Carroll interview than any other interview we did this year, including the Speaker Mike Johnson interview, which was a huge coup for us.
Yeah.
And a great interview. But J.J. Carroll's story was so harrowing, and I think it really opened people's eyes to the reality of what an open border is doing to the most vulnerable among us.
Yes. And when you think, Danielle, about hundreds of thousands of young migrant children whose whereabouts are completely unknown,
Yeah.
It's staggering. It doesn't surprise me that would have provoked J.J. Carroll's interview would have provoked that type of response, because it's horrific, and it's something that's got going forward. I believe that is it Homan who is the new
Borders are.
border czar. I believe that he has made a public commitment to find those children.
Yeah, he
And
has.
and
He
and
just
believe,
sat down with Tucker this past week,
yeah,
I think. It was a
and
great interview.
it was a great interview, and I think he means business, and certainly that is an issue that that begs for justice.
Yeah, it is. It is. I just saw on Twitter Mike Davis, who I love to follow because he's such a fighter for these nominees, and he has just been so salty and right on about everything that's going on. But he said he took back the fact that he wouldn't want to serve in government again, and said that he would do it under one condition: that he could hold Tom Homan's bags. And I just thought that was so great.
Wow.
Yeah, because he's just
Yeah.
people can really see that Tom Homan means what he says, and he has true compassion
What a
for.
compliment. What a
Yeah,
compliment.
it's an
What a
absolute
tribute.
compliment. Well, before we switch gears here, I'd love to ask the listeners, what was your favorite episode of the year? Type it into the chat or send us a message. If you would maybe put it in X, send us a message on X, or put it out on X and recommend some of your favorite interviews to us. Recommend them to or some of our favorite. Our goodness gracious. I haven't had enough caffeine today. I was trying to go on 1 cup of coffee and it's not working for me. Okay.
We're getting there.
Yeah, the
Mm.
episodes you like best, recommend them on X if you would, and tag us. That would be so cool. We'd love to hear what you want to hear more of, and it'll help us as we plot out 2025. Well, Chris, we had a heck of a year in the state of Louisiana. We had 3 special sessions and a regular session. We had some really big wins, and we also learned that we will still have some pretty big fights ahead of us, even though we have a conservative majority. What do you think?
I think that we absolutely will have some fights ahead of us, but we have some good commitments from some good legislators. Thomas Presley, the state senator who brought the WHO bill, Dixon McMakin, who is doing a very good job as a freshman state rep, a commitment to actually go in and streamline our government, to reduce excess spending, and to make our government more accountable to the people. We have got to cut spending. That always seems to be the big elephant in the room that nobody ever wants to talk about.
Except for
Uh,
us That's all we want to talk about.
That's all we want to talk about. Exactly. And there's an argument to be made that what this most recent fiscal session did was basically, swap money around, reduce the corporate income tax, reduce the state income tax, individual income tax, by raising sales taxes across the board to a point where we are now, I think, the highest in the country when you the combined sales tax at about close to 11%.
And that
So
kills local business, Chris. It kills local
yeah,
business. I mean, people are going to, oh, I'm going to do my grocery shopping when I go to the camp in Mississippi, or I'm going to be ordering things and sending them to my son in Houston so that I don't have to pay sales tax. Like the sales tax is literally going to kill business if they don't get on top of that stat.
absolutely. Right now, and it has to be done in the next session. And we've got commitments that it's going to be done. Danielle, the governor, in response to some pressure by Senator Blake Miguez and others, formed this commission, this budget commission that is going to be designed to look at every area of our government and determine where we can reduce spending, where we can be more efficient. And there is a czar that the government is going to be appointed. I know we don't like that word, but who is going to be the head of it. And we're going to see the proof is in the pudding, and we're going to make we're going to see in this next session whether or not our legislature and our governor are truly serious about doing mirroring, let's say, what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are doing on the national level with Doge, there's no question they are serious about streamlining our government and we're just reducing its size and its bloatedness. So we're going to be pushing hard, following very, very closely in this next session. There's been a lot of talk, okay, a lot of talk and a lot of enthusiastic verbal commitments, but we're going to see what happens. And I can promise you that LeCag and the State of Freedom will both be following it very, very closely. People are tired of bloated, big, excessive government that squanders our money. They're sick of it, and I certainly am too.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, on a happier note, what are some of the big highlights, some of the big wins that we saw this
Oh,
past
well, let me
year?
tell
We
you
saw
what.
we were so busy with session because we jumped from session to session to session. It started out with the constitutional redistricting, or the redistricting, the congressional redistricting. Then we went into a criminal session. Then we had the regular session. Then we just wrapped up the tax and budget session, which
Yeah,
was more a tax session and less a budget session.
right. A great victory in the criminal session that we worked very hard on, Danielle, and I'm just very pleased with, is Representative Bakala's bill that will establish a broad-based criminal database so that victims and the public generally can go and see what exactly is going on in these serious felony criminal cases, the motions that are filed, the procedure, whatever plea deals may have been struck, that the public has grown so weary of these judges who hand down these very light sentences in these plea deals that are made in very heinous cases, often, unfortunately. So the public will be able to see exactly what's going on. No more hiding the ball. And I just think that when it comes to transparency, having that database that is accessible to the public and to victims is critically important. We were able to get that done. The sanctuary city bill, Senator Blake Miguez, what a great bill that is. Prohibiting Louisiana from ever being or ever becoming a sanctuary city for illegal aliens.
It
And
even criminalized it, right? It
and
criminalized it.
criminalized it, yes, and so across the board, and there's a provision in the bill that requires immediate termination if any local ordinance or sheriff's office or police department has any kind of a sanctuary policy. Now it has to be terminated. So Louisiana, by law now, will never become a sanctuary city for illegal aliens and have the problems that other states have had. That is a tremendous success. And obviously, Senator Miguez gets credit for that. We worked very hard on that one, too. We've got Representative Mike Johnson. I can't tell you the number of parents, Danielle. Moms for Liberty is an organization that has been so frustrated with this. The fact that parents so often are cut off from, and citizens generally are so often cut off from what's going on in their local municipal government. Everybody's busy. They can't always make meetings, even very important meetings.
Yeah.
But this bill will require live streaming of these very important municipal and school board meetings so that parents and other interested parties can really know what's going on in their local community. And parents specifically can know what's going on with their children in schools. And that is something, that's why it's so important, again, to transparency. And I think it's going to give a lot of relief to parents as well. I don't know, I mentioned briefly in reference to something else, Senator Presley's WHO bill. And I have to tell you, Danielle, this WHO bill that we worked, again, very, very hard to get passed probably was the most important bill of that session. And it simply says that the state of Louisiana will no longer comply directly or indirectly with any health protocol or emergency dictate handed down by the World Health Organization or any other international health organization. The people who are going to be making the decisions with regard to what our protocol is going to be in response to any health emergency or pandemic are going to be the people who sit in the state capitol and represent our interests. And I just think the way Senator Presley, I've mentioned this before, the way he carried that bill through the legislative process, I was very privileged to testify in favor of it before the Senate Health and Welfare Committee. I was just thrilled that that got through, that it was passed, and it is a real layer of protection for us against these tyrannical health organizations.
Right. And it was the first of its kind in the world. There were so many when we were meeting with or interviewing regularly members of the Sovereignty Coalition, they continually pointed to the fact that Louisiana was leading not just the nation, but the world in this kind of legislation. And that's not a place we typically find ourselves in Louisiana. So we have, that is something
we find ourselves in distinguished categories periodically, but it's not generally for the right reasons.
So that was just something to really be proud of, and Senator Presley's constituents in particular should be very proud of him and the way he handled himself with that. And Chris, I don't know if you saw this, but last night I believe it came out that President Trump said that he intends to get us out of the WHO entirely on his first day. I can't even imagine his to-do list for the first day. I hope he has started pointing at people and saying, this is what you're going to have to do on day one, because that list is getting insanely long. But it's so fantastic to hear that he will be getting the claws of that nasty, horrible, sea creature of an organization out from around us, cutting off our funding. To them, the lifeblood of that organization. I hope to see it shrivel up and die a gnarly death. I honestly do. It's caused so much damage worldwide. I'd like to see it completely just shrivel up and die.
I would like to see it shrivel up and die as well.
Yeah.
I would be remiss, Danielle, and there's so many other items of legislation we could talk about, but since this is supposed to be a wrap-up session, holiday session, I won't do so. But I would be remiss if I did not mention the several items of pro-abortion legislation that went through. These Democrats are always trying to chip away at the protections for the unborn in Louisiana.
And some Republicans.
And some Republicans as well. And, with the help of members of our organization and Debbie Melvin, who are always
We the People Bayou community.
We the People Bayou community.
She is the bulldog in chief for pro-life legislation.
She is unbelievable. She and several other people from We the People were at the legislature. They were on top of this legislation. And fortunately, this legislation that was designed to chip away and create these gaps and holes in the pro-life legislation in Louisiana were all defeated. And so the unborn have protection. yet for another year. And I'll tell you, Danielle, and Debbie will tell you the same thing. We can expect more legislation of the same kind in the next session, and we're going to be there. And I know Debbie's going to be there to fight it every step of the way. Because if there's any group in our society that deserves protection, it's the most vulnerable and defenseless, and it's the unborn. And if we can't fight for the unborn, then we should just shut it all down.
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, just to mention a couple others, this was the year that had been long been waited for. Senator Blake Miguez brought legislation that enshrined constitutional carry in the state of Louisiana starting July 4th this year. People can open carry, conceal carry, whatever they want. And that's perfectly legal now, which is a return to the Second Amendment.
It's a return to the Second Amendment. It's not the creation of any new law. It is simply the reflection in statutory law of what's already in the Constitution,
Yeah.
which is no Louisiana citizen has to have the government's permission, law-abiding citizen, in order to carry a firearm on him. That is perfectly consistent with the Second Amendment, and all Senator Miguez's bill did was codify that in statutory law. I will say this, Danielle, that right after that bill was passed, it was amazing. The people who want to chip away at the Second Amendment immediately started.
The buzzards descended.
The buzzards descended and started trying to carve out all these gun-free zones and create penalties for people who don't have a government-issued permit. There were bills that were put forward on that front, and fortunately, we were able to be very aggressive in our posture against those bills, and those bills were defeated. I'll give you one example, Danielle. Do you realize if just one bill, if it had passed, this was Representative Lyons, if his bill had passed, do you realize the entire city of New Orleans would have been a gun-free zone?
Yeah.
And there's a problem with that on so many levels. First of all, it's a fundamental constitutional right. You can't statutorily exclude a constitutional right from being exercised in an entire city. And secondly, for practical reasons, I've always wondered why these people who want these gun-free zones, the rationale and the logic, as if criminals who want to do harm with guns are going to walk down the street and say, oh, well, I want to go kill somebody today, but that's a gun-free zone, so we can't go in there.
Right.
I just think the whole reasoning process is bizarre. But fortunately, our constitutional carry is firmly intact in Louisiana with very limited exceptions.
Yeah. And if, Chris, on that point, these school shootings should be proof positive that gun-free zones do not work.
Oh, they don't work. But, it's unfortunate that every time there is a school shooting, the people who want the gun-free zones use the shooting as though it is a basis for their argument, when it really proves just the opposite.
Exactly.
Criminals and people who are mentally demented are not going to follow the law. Okay. And so the only thing you're doing by disarming people, law-abiding people in these zones, is making them more vulnerable and more defenseless. It just doesn't make any sense.
No, I saw a great meme this past weekend that said that if guns are responsible for killing people, then pencils are responsible for grammatical errors and spoons are responsible for making people fat. So follow that logic. All right, I've got to close out on one last piece of legislation. If you have been with us since the beginning, we have to really take a small victory lap, Chris, around this one. We once again defeated the cockroach bill thanks to Representative Mike Bayham's enthusiasm and just his outstanding speech on the House floor. But this one is the bill that tried to penalize us if we were driving down the road and talking with our phone on speakerphone, had our hand on our phone, or just conducting a phone call. This is nothing related to texting and driving. That's already, I think there's already laws against that. But this is for people who, may be looking at a map on their phone, maybe, whatever. Anyway, freedom reigns supreme with your phone calling. while
Yeah.
you're driving.
While you're driving, and this is, again, as we've always said, Danielle, this is just an example of government overreach. There is nothing in the Constitution that allows the government to penalize a person who is violating no law, no traffic ordinance, and happens to be talking on a handheld cell phone in their vehicle in a responsible manner. This was just an example of government overreach, and I believe even more nefarious, it was an opportunity that insurance companies saw to be able to drive up premiums and
Yeah.
drive up rates. And this the second or the third time, I don't know, Danielle, that this was defeated, but I hope and I pray that it is dead for good now, and that
Yeah.
we don't even have to waste time on this. The idea that Louisiana citizens are not able to talk on a phone while they're driving a vehicle is just, to me, that is something that will never be acceptable in the state of Louisiana. And I think our name for it, the cockroach bill, is apt.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, Chris, it would be a huge miss if we did not talk about the elections. We had big elections this year that changed the trajectory of the country. And I have to say, I'll speak for both of us, Chris. We're so proud to have been even small voices or voices that were a small part of the tidal wave of President Trump's victory. And we're already starting to see the fruit of that in so many ways, with the stellar nominees, the choices he's made for cabinet positions with countries respecting the U.S. again, and with illegal aliens being put on notice. We also had a couple of elections locally and even regionally, along with some statewide constitutional amendments that came onto the ballot in November and December, that made a few waves here as well, Chris.
Oh yeah. Well, obviously Trump's victory. It is such a privilege to be able to have voices on the state of freedom that have such broad reach and give them an opportunity to speak, articulate their position, because these are heavy hitters. These are the heavyweights, many of whom we have had on our show, and talking about the election, leading up to the election, all the things that can and should be done in order to safeguard the election. And there's no doubt that our participation had an influence in the outcome of that election. There's no question about it. And I'm so thankful for Trump and the courage that he showed.
Yeah.
Uh, I do have some concerns about the down ballots, some of the congressional races on the down ballots. I mean, I look at some of these races, Danielle, in Colorado, California, other places where Trump wins handily in the state, and wins handily even in these congressional districts,
Arizona.
Arizona, and yet the Democrat defeats the Republican who was closely aligned with Trump in that race. So are you telling me that there's no fraud, there's no manipulation? You're telling me that someone who is going to go to the polls and vote for Trump is then going to go down the ballot and vote for a leftist Democrat
Or
as
even
opposed
that
to a conservative Republican?
Exactly, or even that there were more votes in the local election than there were in the presidential election, right? Where the Democrat congressional or senatorial candidate would be winning by thousands more votes than even voted in the presidential election. That's ridiculous.
It is ridiculous. Also, the fact that it took in these congressional races, it took some of these states weeks and weeks and weeks to count the votes.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, all of the votes that came in late or the ones that they located all seemed to favor the Democrat in those races. And now, I believe, Danielle, if I'm not mistaken, the Republican congressional majority is going to be either 218, 215, or 217, 215. Very, very close.
Yeah.
And I think that clearly has to do with some down ballot fraud. There's no doubt about that. But very, very pleased. And I do want to mention some great news about our mayor's race right here in Baton Rouge. I have to mention this to you. Sid Edwards was the Republican in that race. East Baton Rouge Parish is majority Black, and most people thought that a Republican had no chance to win. Well, LeCag, our PAC, completely disagreed with that because we saw the weaknesses in both the Democrat incumbent in the mayor's race and one of the other challenger, Ted James, the former state rep. We worked very, very hard to make sure that the voting public became aware of exactly who those people are and what their records are. And you know what turned out, Danielle? Sid Edwards not only won, but he won handily. And I think that even Black citizens in East Baton Rouge Parish finally realized we just have to have a change here. Sharon Broom has driven the city of Baton Rouge into the ground. We could expect more of Ted James if he wins. And there was a collective decision on the part of many African Americans to make a different decision and move forward with Sid Edwards. And I think he's going to do an outstanding job, Republican Mayor of Baton Rouge. And, LeCag is just very, very privileged and pleased to have been a part of that victory.
And cheers to you. Cheers to you. That's a fantastic win. And I hope that we will start seeing some real measurable changes in the way Baton Rouge is operated.
Absolutely. And I think we're already starting to see it. I wanted to mention a couple of constitutional amendments that we supported and that were passed as well. You recall, Danielle, the last 10 minutes of the 2023 regular session on the House floor, where our state legislators had no idea what they were voting on. The Senate had put all these amendments on the House appropriations bill with all of this new proposed spending, sent it back over to the House for them to ratify it. And they had literally 10 minutes to look at this voluminous piece of legislation. No time to do it. It was a total fiasco on the floor of the House. And
not too dissimilar to the one we just witnessed in Congress.
Exactly. So in order to prevent that from ever happening again, there were a couple of constitutional amendments that would automatically allow a 2-day extension of the legislative session in order to give the House an opportunity to review any appropriations bills, and also to give them at least 48 hours, and also to extend the session itself by 2 days at a time, if necessary, so that they can really do justice to the legislation. And they're not put in that position where they're having to vote on things that they are not even, particularly when it comes to our money. This is all about our money and how it's being spent. So those two constitutional amendments are going to really help in that process.
Yeah. And looking at this, looking at it in light of this whole congressional omnibus, fiasco that seemed to play out in large part on Twitter, it does provide incentives to the fiscal committees to get their ducks in a row if they don't want to be in session in perpetuity, right?
Mhm.
Because it will just keep going
Yeah.
unless they figure it out. So go ahead and get your little ducks in row early, and then you can go home on time.
Danielle, that was the first thing that you mentioned when I said when we talked about these amendments and how they could potentially extend the session, have an automatic 48 days for the House to leave it. Your first thought was, well, if anything is going to motivate these senators to make sure that they have their ducks in a row and they send things over to the House in a timely manner, these appropriations amendments and bills, this is going to do it, because they don't want to be there generally any longer than they have to be.
Yeah. Awesome. So it's been a jam-packed year. We have so much to be proud of. We worked so hard, and we know that the listeners work so hard. We're so thankful that you have participated with the calls to action, that you have been doing calls to action on your own, to your congressional leaders in Washington and the senators as well. So I feel a lot of momentum, Chris. I feel like we are really kind of riding a wave right now. And what's coming up next year from us, you can expect more of the same. I think we're going to keep working on improving, but you can expect great interviews and commentary from us. Like I said early on, we'd love to hear what you want more from us, how you'd prefer to hear more what you would like to hear best from us. I don't know how to say what I've been trying to say this whole time. Tell us what you want to hear. That's what I'm
I
trying to say.
understand.
All
And,
right.
and do not forget, if you haven't done so yet, to become a monthly donor and subscriber to the State of Freedom, because we're continuing to build our infrastructure. We're continuing to expand across the state. And in order to continue to advance the voice of freedom and liberty, your voice, the voice of the citizens, we need your support. So
Yeah.
please become a monthly donor of the State of Freedom so that we can continue to bring you really what I believe is the best content in the state and among the best content nationally because of the guests that we have and the legislative insights in our own state that you and I provide.
Yeah. Yeah. And we get to have a lot of fun. I hope that you come and like when you're checking out one of our episodes, I hope that you feel like this is going to be fun. I mean, I hope you feel like you're coming to learn something, but hopefully you also feel like you know us, and that, your friends, your family, we love you guys so much.
We are, and we always have fun. I mean, one thing I love doing our podcast because it's always fun. It's not only informative, it's fun. And you know what? And I found someone who is willing to put up with me on a daily basis and work with me and be patient with me. And so I can't let that go.
Like whenever he throws his laptop on the ground.
Like whenever I throw my laptop on the ground, although it was accidental, and I think that was God's way of telling me that it's time for a new laptop.
It is.
So,
It is time for a new laptop. So
and
donate to LeCag as well.
yes.
www.lecag.org. Well, look, we are all watching and counting down to the inauguration. 2025 has some pretty spectacular things in store. Louisiana's regular session convenes in April. That'll be a fiscal session, so it'll, in theory, be shorter. But we'll also be keeping an eye out for a special session on insurance. That's a possibility that's been floated, so keep an eye out for that. Yeah, and then things are also going to be heating up in Louisiana with a senatorial election coming up in 26. So we saw, we had Dr. John Fleming, our state treasurer, on announcing his candidacy, throwing his hat in the ring against Bill Cassidy. That was episode number 256. If you missed it, would love for you to check it out. You could get kind of his full perspective on Cassidy and why he feels called to run. We've heard Blake Miguez is sending strong signals that he may be throwing his hat in the ring as well, but we think he may be waiting for Congressman Clay Higgins to see what he does, because he's also considered a contender in that race. So we have our eyes on a lot of things next year. But Chris, what is it that you're looking most forward to in 25?
Well, I'm looking forward to getting into the legislature and seeing real legislative and executive efforts on the part of our governor to reduce the size of our bloated government, to make it more efficient, to cut spending, and just ultimately to make our government more responsive and accountable to the people. That is what the people want. It's a fiscal session. And as I said earlier, Danielle, we have commitments. And I know that many reps and senators, Blake Miguez, Dixon McMakin, Thomas Presley, are very eager to get in and really make the decisions that need to be made to do just that. So I'm looking forward to that in the fiscal session. I'm also looking forward to continuing our effort to make gold and silver transactional currency in Louisiana. There was some great testimony on that bill by our treasurer, also by the author of the bill, Representative Raymond Cruz, in the last session. Ultimately, I really think because of some confusion about the bill and also some special interest pressure that was placed on some of these legislators, it did not get through. But we're going to continue to educate people on what an instrument of freedom this is if we were able to make gold and silver real transactional currency in Louisiana. And we are excited and will be very much focused on that, among other things as well.
Yeah, I'm also looking forward to, or at least hopeful, that Louisiana, through Treasurer Fleming's leadership will take a look at Bitcoin and having a
Oh, yeah.
reserve of Bitcoin for the state. Obviously, the value of Bitcoin is surging, and it's an important thing to not be left behind on. It's an important asset, and it will be going forward. President Trump has already signaled that very strongly and said it very directly. And Bitcoin is surging on his election, so that will be awesome as well. I know we talked about maybe addressing the chemtrails and looking at some of the states that have already done that. I pray that that's on the top of RFK Jr.'s list. And on top of the state stuff, I'm looking forward to seeing Trump's picks in place. I'm looking to see justice come in. I want to see the destruction of the bureaucratic monstrosity that's strangling the innovation and economic prowess of the American people. But the same can be said for our state, right? That's exactly what you were just saying about our state. We have a lot of work to do to dismantle the Louisiana deep state, the Louisiana bureaucratic monstrosity. And I'm looking forward to all of us standing up and doing our part to make Louisiana great again, to make America great again. We all have a role to play. We've said this from the very beginning, that there's so much work to be done, and all of our voices matter. All of our efforts are what has gotten us to this point. If you think about when we started, we were on the heels. We couldn't even get legislation passed to say that parents needed to be made aware that their kids didn't have to get a vaccine that isn't even um, approved by the FDA. That's insane. And here we are going to a place where, I mean, RFK Jr. and Trump have talked about well, they haven't talked about outlawing vaccines, but they have said that they were very interested in getting to the bottom of the skyrocketing autism rates among in children. And I think we are going to start seeing some erosion of all these insane um, wrongs that have been committed against the American people, whether it's through the food supply, whether it's through the health, medical, industrial complex, whether it's through illegal taxation and the Federal Reserve, whether it's through endless wars, the erosion, I think censorship and the total disregard for free speech. There's so many areas where there's work to be done. And I think that we've seen people, patriots, stand up, many of them, and indicate that that's a hill that they're willing to die on.
Very
So
much so.
I'm
And
looking
I'll
forward
tell
to being part of that and seeing that.
Me too. And there's no reason why what is being done on the federal level cannot be mirrored, as you said, on the state level. And
Yeah.
it gives me such encouragement and it emboldens me, and I know it emboldens others to see these things happening on the federal level, going forward to try to accomplish the same things on the state level. There's no excuses left, Danielle. Time is up. It is time to move forward and do what needs to be done. And that litany of things that you just ran through is exactly correct.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I have on my side, but I do want to wish everyone a very Merry Christmas. I want to just give you a reminder to subscribe to us on whatever your preferred platform is, YouTube, Rumble, or X. You can find the links to those in the show notes and on freedomstate.us. Chris, I hope you and your family have a wonderful Christmas. It's going to be probably a hectic couple of days, but the weather's going to look beautiful, at least down here.
Oh my gosh. It is the weather here in Baton Rouge right now, Danielle, is absolutely majestic. I can't wait to get outside into it. I've got a long honeydew list from Katie
Hmm.
that I've got to go take care of, but I expect
You
to.
better check
uh,
that list twice.
Yes, I'll check it twice. I expect to implement it faithfully, even if not perfectly.
There you go.
So that's where we'll be. But Merry Christmas to you and yours as well, Danielle. I'm so thankful to work with you, and just thankful to have this platform that we have as we continue to build.
Me too. God bless everybody. God bless you, Chris.
You too.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless. All right. Well, that's a
We're
wrap
good.
for, yeah.
All right. Love you. When
All right.
will this